This episode is brought to you in part by Form Kitchens, Signature Doors and Windows, and Modern in Denver magazine. Now, on to the show.
His point was, you don't have to be an architect to affect change in the built environment. And so I think right then and there, I realized that if I were to pursue architecture, once I'm out of school, who actually has the creative control? It's not always the architect, right? They're typically hired and engaged to realize a vision. Well, who's in control? It's those who own the property or those with the capital. And so it inspired me to pursue business, and ultimately that's what I pursued when I came to Denver.
Hi. Hello.
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 Hello and welcome to Architecting.
Hi, good evening or good morning or whatever time you're listening. I'm Rebecca Wagner, here with the host of the podcast, Adam. Hey, Adam. Who's on the podcast today?
Wow, that was a better introduction than the one we just recorded and that didn't get recorded.
Wah, wah.
I hate that. Yeah, so today we have Jorgen Jensen on the show, former founder of Slate Real Estate Advisors and the current co-founder of Fantastic Frank Colorado Edition. So yeah, I discovered Jorgen. I think he's kind of a famous guy around town, well connected and well known, but discovered him through their website, where they had a directory of Colorado architects, a cool list of good architects working, and then he reached out and invited Vessel Architecture, now Further Architecture, the rebrand, to be on the list as well. Good way to my heart. You had a funnier joke the first time we recorded.
The second time.
It's like trying to recreate the spontaneity of our that first introduction that didn't get recorded. It was just perfect. You had to just imagine how perfect a perfect introduction could be, and now we're just forcing it. Anyway, sorry, Jorgen. But yeah, he's just a cool guy. Got to know him a little bit more, and he generously came on and helped sponsor the podcast to help me buy these microphones that then sometimes don't work and don't record an introduction. No, but came on to sponsor us, and then got to know him better, and just an interesting guy. I think probably one of our first guests who's an architecture school dropout, but knows a lot about design, and really in the design world, in his work with real estate and brokerage, but early on was involved with Dana Crawford and the development of downtown and Union Station, and just continues to be pretty involved. So
cool. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's a good one. And this is a bit of a special episode in another way. We've only had one season, and we'll continue just to have one continuous long season of this podcast probably, but I've been essentially going for about the last 2.5 years, and you've going straight, and you've convinced me to take a bit of a break. So we're going to be taking about a 2 or 3 month break from interviewing new people. So a bit of a pause. But in that time, I think we're going to have some new kind of projects coming in, maybe a little mini series or a little spinoff or two. And then we're going to have lots of upcoming live events and happy hours and hangouts and panels and stuff like that. So stay tuned for that. Taking a break. And yeah, also we've rebranded our personal firm, Vessel Office of Architecture, to be Further Architecture Office now. So go check that out at furtherarchitecture.com, and don't forget us in these next 2 months. Stay tuned for when we come back.
I'm not going to leave you.
I'm so scared. Please keep listening. No, but yep. Keep connecting, keep reaching out, and enjoy this one. Bye. But first, here's a few messages from our sponsors. Hey, so today we have Michael Quinn from Form Kitchens on. Look, we all have kitchens. Most all of us want better kitchens. Michael, why should we get Form Kitchens?
I think what you said was sort of the epiphany for our CEO. We all want better kitchens, right? And he grew up doing it as a family business. And then as an adult, he saw the beautiful, stunning kitchens we all see on Pinterest and Instagram and basically tried to put one together himself and just couldn't find that aesthetic at a great price point and wondered why the process was so inefficient and so manual. He thought, well, if I'm seeing these online, why can't I just order them online? And so that's really the idea behind Form Kitchens, is not only to design and deliver beautiful, stunning, modern kitchens, but to wrap the whole design process in a really modern context. So we design all online. We've built our own software that powers the experience, and it's all really about streamlining and simplifying high-end design, and then through a direct-to-consumer model, really just making it more affordable and more accessible.
Yeah. The great thing is that Michael is here in Denver, so you can reach out to him as well. And if you're looking for more information, we have a special link for the podcast. You can go to social.formkitchens.com/architecting. Thanks for the partnership, Michael.
Thanks, Adam. Really cool what you've created over Architecting. We're excited to start to be a part of the community. And like you said, never hesitate to reach out. I love grabbing coffee, and you can shoot me a note at michael@formkitchens.com.
Perfect. Thanks. And now back to the show. Well, thanks for having me over to your cool little playhouse here.
Yeah.
A little hangout. It's nice. I was just here last night.
I was going to say, a long time no see.
I know. What'd you have going? Well, first off, where are we at? And then what'd you have going on last night?
So we're at the headquarters for Fantastic Frank, Colorado.
Fantastic Frank, USA.
That's right. The first in the United States. But we're in Lodi at 17th and Central. We're in the Edge Lodi condo project. And last evening we hosted our fourth exhibition. It was an opening reception for the fourth exhibit that we've hosted in the Nook, Denver's smallest art gallery, at the corner of our office here. And it was a great turnout. I think everyone was really pleased.
Yeah. We caught the tail end and bringing in our brood of kids and cleaned up the rest of the food table. And
yeah, it was fun to meet your kids. And the collaboration for this exhibition is with the Colorado Photographic Arts Center. And, we sold some art, raised some money for their Framing the Future campaign. So they've signed a lease on their next space at the former Art Institute building, which is being redeveloped, and hired Simple Brown to realize that vision for them. And so we learned last evening that their goal was to raise $200,000 over the last, they've been at this for a few months, and I think they're at 180.
Wow, nice.
So well on their way.
I hope that wasn't one of the pieces of art my kids bought. They wrote down a bunch of numbers and turned it in. And
oh, did they?
No. We did have a big discussion about how to not touch art. And yeah, it was funny. The first thing we did, we came in here and there's this huge J.C. Buck photo print on the wall, but it's metallic. And our kids were wanted to touch that thing so bad. And we're like, no, you can't touch it. And then you came up and we're like, oh, you can touch that. You can nothing. No, that's not what we're trying to teach them here.
Yeah, you corrected me on that quick, so I had to renege on what I said. But
yes, in theory, you can touch that. But larger scale.
Even JC, when he installed it, him and his installer, they were like, all you have to do is get a damp cloth. You can wipe it down. I'm like, I don't know. But he's like, trust me, we've done many of these prints.
It's like 8 feet by 12 feet or something. It's this massive, beautiful mountain print. But yeah,
it's part of his. That was a commission when we first opened our office. We knew we needed a piece for that large wall, and this was a series. It actually created a series called Alpine,
mm-hmm.
And so he has photographed many mountain scenes that are, without a tripod. So There's 9 exposures there, freehand.
Oh, really?
But that's what kind of gives it that
Yeah, I was wondering.
painterly effect. So yeah, all of his works in black and white, pretty incredible, large scale.
Yeah, I got lucky. I made him some tacos, and he took pictures of my treehouse, and that's what got me into modern in Denver. And
That was your treehouse.
And then yeah, it got me this sponsorship and everything. So yeah,
Amazing.
I owe him a lot. Yeah,
You've connected with him outside of
yeah. We
that as well.
I connected with him pretty early on and had him shoot projects at 359 when I was there, 359 Design, and then yeah, we stayed in touch. But
he's one of my biggest inspirations. You gotta love those friends that really inspire you and encourage you, and he has since day one. So.
Yeah, seems like you have a lot of those. Like I keep
Yeah.
running across people who know you or just everybody.
Well, those are the good friends to keep around, and I try to reciprocate.
Yeah. Tell me the connection with the Colorado Photographic Art Center.
Yeah, so the CPAC, as a photographer myself, I've always really appreciated their organization and what they do. But the real fun connection is about 7 years ago when we started Slate Real Estate Advisors. We needed a space. I was at the Source Market Hall having coffee, and I was eavesdropping on the couple next to me. And one of the women sitting there is Samantha, who's the executive director. And I overheard her saying how Carol Keller, who's a board member, and I think she might have actually been a founder as well. I knew she had this really cool space in Lohi where the CPAC had office and had like exhibition space. And I overheard this conversation that Carol had, CPAC had vacated, and then Carol came in and like kind of renovated the space. And she was looking for a tenant or an end user. And so I kind of chimed in and I was like, I know Carol, and I know the space. Tell me more about this. I just started a company and we're looking for space. And so she kind of filled me in. And then before you know it, I was talking with Carol and we signed a lease. So our former space was at 1513 Boulder Street, just up the street from where we're at now. We were there for like 4 years prior to building out this space, but it was very small. It was 1,200 square feet. It was an art gallery, concrete floors, white walls. I called it the echo chamber. You really couldn't have two people on the phone at the same time, but we made that work as a kind of a launching point for our company.
It's funny you say that because we're in a concrete floor, white walled space now. I mean, nice wood paneling. Yeah, it's not nice, not nice, but yeah.
It's larger. There's some acoustic treatments.
I like that idea of just sitting in the Source and overhearing conversations and connecting it up. I feel like that's a lot of your life, maybe, or your personality. So if we have to drill down into this, who are you?
So Jorgen Jensen, originally from Iowa. Actually, I just hit 16 years in Denver, which kind of mind blowing. If I were to summarize, I'd say I'm a design-driven real estate broker and developer based downtown Denver. That's really the gist of it. Although outside of work, I'm involved in a lot of different things, which I'd be happy to talk about here today. And I don't know, feel pretty fortunate to call this place home, having come from Iowa, and proud to be from there. But I mean, how lucky are we to call this place?
Yeah. Yes, let's talk about that. So where in Iowa did you go?
I grew up just outside downtown Des Moines. So many people are familiar with the city of Des Moines, but I like to say that I have had the honor to pleasantly surprise people when I take them to Des Moines.
Yeah.
It is a fascinating city because it's the world's third largest insurance capital. So you have London, Hartford, Connecticut, Des Moines, and then New York.
Really?
And so that's 150 years of insurance industry there, which obviously came from agriculture, but it's led to so much investment in civic art and culture. And so it makes for a really amazing downtown.
Yeah. Had like your family been in Iowa for a long time?
Yeah.
You have a lot of roots there?
Yeah, my mother was third generation, fourth generation Danish American. And so this is also a surprise for many people, but we have like one of the largest Danish immigration communities and largest Dutch immigration communities. I'm half Dutch, half Danish. But there's also in Eastern Iowa, a real, I think it's one of the best examples of German communal living. And so you have these immigration zones in different parts of the state.
Yeah.
But I grew up in the city of Des Moines, which, luckily had a lot of art and cultural elements where when I moved there, I was 5, but we grew up right next to the Des Moines Art Center. And there's just this, again, it kind of comes as a surprise for a lot of people, but there's really amazing culture there, works of architecture. I mean, we have Chipperfields, Mies van der Rohe, I.M. Pei, Richard Meyer, Saarinen. I mean, we can keep going, actually. Renzo Piano.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you've never been, let me know. It's only an hour and a half flight.
Have I been? I actually don't think I have. No. Yeah.
It's unless you're driving, it's quite easy to get there.
Yeah. So did you have a real sense of that design surroundings like when growing up, or was that something you found later?
I did twofold. I had a single mother who grew up with a single mother who, again, was very Danish and very proud of her Danish heritage. And she knew the concept of hygge
Yeah.
before many did.
Before it was painted on whiteboards in cursive all over.
No, she literally, I was in college and she always sent these care packages. And one of them, oftentimes there'd be like newspaper clippings, right? And so like the Des Moines Register. And I think in this case it was like New York Times or something, but there's a story about who. And now my good friends Alexandra and Kuhn in Eagleville run a business called Hygge Life. And through connecting with them and getting to understand the concept more, like how it really took off in America and maybe around the world, but it was actually that New York Times article. It all goes back to that article that kind of sparked this craze around hygge, which is, the Danish concept of contentment, coziness. It doesn't really translate perfectly to English.
Yeah.
But anyhow, she knew how to create a home. She knew how to create spaces with comfort in mind. The second piece of this was my mentor, my best friend's father. I met my friend Ryan in 6th grade, and his father was what you would call a starchitect. Locally, truly. He Kirk von Blanc of Herbert Louis Crucy Blanc, HLKB, was this like massive firm that had received like international awards. He was one of the youngest fellows in AIA. I think he was like 39 or something.
Wow.
David Adjaye is another guy that was late 30s when he was initiated as a fellow. But that was really cool because I was always hungry and wanted to follow Kirk around, help him when I could. From 6th grade up until I went to college, I actually worked for him. I worked for him renovating buildings downtown Des Moines. He was one of the first to purchase and redevelop these large warehouse buildings in the historic East Village. What's cool about that was he, like Dana Crawford, our local queen of preservation here in Denver, he was inspired by his time in Boston. So he got his master's at MIT in architecture. Dana actually went to Radcliffe. That's before they allowed women at Harvard.
Right,
she went to school at Radcliffe and also spent time in Boston. Both of them were so inspired by the adaptive reuse projects, the preservation efforts locally, like Newbury Street in Boston. Have you been there before?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like great example of large scale historic preservation, placemaking. They both brought their visions to their hometowns or where they live, Denver for Dana, Des Moines for Kirk. Kirk was redeveloping these properties really inspired by also John Hickenlooper. What was going on in Denver, I've learned later, actually inspired many cities across the country. So yeah, it happened.
Just putting breweries into brick buildings.
That's right. Actually, no, not too many people know this, but the success of the Wine Coop Brewery in Denver spawned 8 breweries across the Midwest. Des Moines was one of those cities, and Kirk von Blanc, my mentor, was the architect of record for the Raccoon River Brewery. So each brewery was place-based named. So, the Raccoon River is right next to this old historic building.
Sounds appetizing.
Yeah. And yeah, so he actually, he got engaged with Hickenlooper quite a bit. Came out here for inspirational tours and such, met Dana Crawford. So yeah, so for me though, that was someone I really looked up to. He, not only was this like stud architect of civic and public architectures, he did a lot of contemporary works. He was probably more known as a modernist or contemporary architect. However, he developed a knack for historic tax preservation credits, historic tax credits. Yeah. And so he really became a master at that and was the first to redevelop these buildings in the East Village, which at the time was comparable to Larimer Square back in the day, which people used to call Skid Row. It was pretty scary. I remember I spent most Saturdays, most weekends and summers working for him. But I remember there's often times where you're kind of scared because there's riffraff and people heckling you as you're coming in and out of these buildings. But
aren't construction workers supposed to be doing the heckling? It's the opposite. You're getting catcalled by that.
Yeah. Well, now what's cool is I go home and the downtown East Village is like the place to be.
Right. Yeah.
Best part of downtown. He also he had one of the largest design shared collections. And maybe I'll talk about this later, but he passed away in 2016. And when he passed, he had his chair collection on exhibition at Drake University.
Really?
And so like some days my job is like help him move these chairs around, or it's mostly grunt crew stuff.
I was going to say, like, when you say you worked for him that long, were you into architecture at all, drawing at all, like models, or was it pushing a broom?
I go back to my mother. She, day one in Des Moines, dropped me into art class at the Des Moines Art Center. And I got married there, but I get really nostalgic when I go there and think about this. As a kid, being in these art classes, and this amazing is the wing of the Sheridan building, the original. And so for me, that was really inspiring. And I think all through middle school, high school, I think my favorite class was art class. But watching Kurt do what he did, because he didn't just go in and renovate a building. He was the architect. Like that's what's unique, right? Like I don't think, like Dana's not an architect. So she always hired like Triba or some other architect, Jim Johnson. Whereas Kurt could go in and kind of be the developer, be the designer, have full control, which I thought was really interesting. But he also, I think, inspired me to pursue art and design. You know, just being in his home, his art collection, the chairs, everything was a little all over the place. Like, you know, I think a lot of creatives they're not always the most organized people. And he would have like frames on frames stacked and you start to understand what that was about. Well, he's been collecting since he was like really young, like in college. So for me, I don't know, it kind of propelled my interest in architecture, and it's what drove me to pursue architecture as a degree at Iowa State. So later.
So you were on like a track, right? Like you were like, you've been working around this guy and like seeing the insides of a big architecture firm and just like, okay, yep, I'm going to be an architect, and here's Iowa State. And
and actually that job was twofold though. So I did, again, grunt crew is like me and sometimes his son and our friends, but we were kind of going in and doing a lot more demos. We were encouraged to wear a mask. I didn't always wear a mask. So hopefully someday I don't have an issue like mesothelioma. Yeah. But he also, at the same time, he also had this really amazing architecture firm. And so I was, again, mostly through high school when I worked there, but I got to see the ins and outs of like how this big studio practice existed in a downtown building. And you know, if I had to guess, they probably had 100 people working there at one point.
Wow, yeah.
So pretty inspiring as a high schooler.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's pretty unique to just have access to the architecture world. So I feel like, but then to see it from a principal's point of view at a 100-person firm, I mean, also very unique, right? And really getting into that. So yeah, so you keep saying what you started in architecture degree or started. So what happened there?
I'm a dropout. I'm an architecture school dropout.
They end up making the most money, don't they? The dropouts.
Well, it was really difficult for me when I decided to pursue business, and I flip-flopped it. So I started off architecture degree, minor in entrepreneurial studies and business, and Iowa State University which is actually one of the top, at the time, is like one of the top 25 architecture schools in the country. What was unique about their program was it's a 5-year program. The first year is design studio.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. So whether you're landscape, city planning, interiors, graphic architecture, everyone has to go through design studio to develop a portfolio.
Yeah.
And then most people go into the program knowing what they want to pursue, but others didn't. So they would have that year to like figure it out and then submit a portfolio. So for me, that was a very rewarding first year of school because they really hammer you hard on how to like work with your right brain, not always your left. How to, you know the deal, you've been through it, like all-nighters, building models, drawings. And I loved the creative process in that. And I really enjoyed that first year. It was halfway through my sophomore year where I ended up, first summer in college, I ended up moving to Chicago and got a job on the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which at the time was the world's largest agricultural commodities exchange. So here I am, 19-year-old kid from Iowa, design major, working in the pits with all these traders. This is back when they had open outcry. And
did you just overhear a conversation in a coffee shop and get that job, or what?
My best friends, one of my best friends growing up through church and also through high school or through school, her father's brother was Steve Brewer, Brewer Investment Group. I went out there. We went on a road trip to go to a concert at the House of Blues. From Iowa, it's like a 5-minute drive, or a 5-hour drive. And this guy, Steve Brewer, took us in. And by the time we were leaving to go home, he said, if you want to come back here this summer, I can get you a job.
Huh.
And so it's kind of like an uncle connection.
Yeah.
But he connected me to the founders of Spike Trading, and I took this job. And it was really crazy because, I'm bottom of the food chain, not making a lot of money, living in Lakeview, like near Wrigley, taking the train at like 4:45 in the morning to get to work, not making much at all. But talk about an eye-opening experience, right? Like it truly was. And that was the second to last year of open outcry trading. It all went and actually the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, ended up closing down and moved into the Board of Trade. So that was like the last of an era, and I got to experience it. But I bring it up because I think that time in Chicago, I ended up going back the following 3 summers. So I did 4 summers there, and it really inspired me to pursue business, understanding that my passion was in architecture and design, ultimately looking at Kirk as like this architect and developer. So I was inspired by that. And there was actually a moment where Kirk came to Chicago and to visit, and he and I were sitting in the amphitheater, the Frank Gehry Amphitheater at the Millennium Park. My office is right across the street on Michigan. He and I, we sat at that in the amphitheater in the chairs, and it's completely empty. I was starting to realize that I may go back to school and transition out of architecture. And I was really having a hard time with that. I was battling because I think from 6th grade on, I told everyone I knew and loved that I was going to be an architect, and this is what I was going to do. And so I was really internally battling with that decision. And here's Kirk, who's an amazing architect, right? He's my biggest source of inspiration and always encouraged me to pursue architecture.
And he said, "Get out."
Get out. You know what he said, which it always stuck with me, was, here we are at the Millennium Park, and on the wall was this big sign, and it had all the donors. You're seeing the Pritzkers and like all these families, not just philanthropists, but like the architects, the engineers, the whole team. And there's probably 1,000 names etched into this wall. And Kirk took a moment to say, well, look at this wall. Like, for me, I had seen Kirk make an impact on my hometown of Des Moines. I always thought how cool that he can drive down the street and be like, that's my building I designed, or that's my property I own. In terms of legacy, he had a built legacy. And I think that's kind of what drove my interest in architecture. And he's like, well, look at the sign. He goes, out of all those names, how many do you think are architects? Right?
Yeah.
There's just a couple architectural firms and maybe their principals, but outside of that, like the whole point is it takes a village, right? Like there's truly all these people made this Millennium Park project happen, which was like a wasteland, originally. And so that kind of stuck with me. His point was, you don't have to be an architect to affect change in the built environment. And so I think right then and there, I realized, well, yeah, that makes sense. And I also realized that if I were to pursue architecture, once I'm out of school, it's who actually has the creative control. It's not always the architect, right? They're typically hired and engaged to realize a vision. Well, who's in control? It's those who own the property or those with the capital. And so, I don't know, it inspired me to pursue business. And ultimately, that's what I pursued when I came to Denver.
It takes most architects until they're out of school to discover that bad truth.
All of a sudden, I felt okay about my decision.
Yeah. Okay, so you were like, all right, you made the choice, you made the hard choice to get out. You probably didn't have any friends anymore because all your friends were in architecture school. They had to make new friends. Did a full business degree.
Mm-hmm.
And then what? So you kept going back to Chicago in the summers, and then you graduated at some point.
Yeah. So like I said, I flipped it. So I pursued a finance degree with a minor in design. So it made for a great, like at this point I had to go fifth year. So I was a fifth year senior, but it made for a very interesting, like last few semesters in college, because I was going from like high level finance, marketing, business, accounting classes to landscape architectural history, art history. I still pursued some of those courses at the design school. So it kind of made for this nice balance in the day. And then when I moved to Colorado, day one, I was in sales. I was raising capital for different real estate projects. This is about 1 year before the Great Recession. I graduated into this 2006, moved to Denver in January 2007. So I pursued business, but I always had a creative bent, I guess. And I couldn't always realize that at work. So it came down to like, well, what am I doing outside of it? And I got really engaged initially with the Lodo District, the downtown nonprofit that exists to support businesses in the historic lower downtown neighborhood. And I got really involved there, and it's more community development stuff, urban design stuff. But again, I showed up where I had interests, I had passions, and in less than a year, Dana Crawford, I got to know Dana, and she had just formed the Union Station Advocates. So she brought me onto the board in 2009. And that was cool because I was like the only person under the age of like 40. I was 23. But
yeah.
That nonprofit existed to influence, it's like a citizens advocacy group, but it existed to influence the design excellence around the 19 acres of public space around Union Station. And so that was kind of cool. I'm a young guy, just moved to Denver. And every 30 days, I'm sitting down with, Ken Schreppel, who founded Denver Infill. And so there was architects, developers, preservationists like Dana that were involved there. So I don't know, for me, that was a great outlet.
And that's just you getting here, boots on the ground, just networking, just meeting people, just flashing that smile, just
things just showing up.
Just showing up.
Yeah. I mean, that was really, that was a special moment in time because no one knew what the outcome was going to be for the actual Union Station building. And ultimately, they decided to engage Skidmore, Owens, Merrill. I mean, all these big international East Coast, West Coast firms that, in terms of for Denver, it was quite the honor to have them involved. So, we participate in all these meetings, and then like the goal was always to draft a position. So like, what was our position on this? As it relates to the public spaces, like the plazas and, that whole entire redevelopment site, there's a lot of public realm to be considered.
Yeah.
So I don't know, at an early age in Denver, it was really fun to be part of that process, because you realize like what we're deciding to do here today is going to have this like lasting impact. And, anytime I go to Union Station now, I can't walk across the plaza or walk down the sidewalk without thinking about that whole moment in time. So it was pretty cool.
That's a cool time to get there. It's like I moved here in 16, and so it was already done. It's like that's always been a thing for me that's done. For you, of like coming in right before it changes and then having a hand in that has to be interesting and also probably empowering too, right?
It was. I mean, let's just put it this way. When I left Iowa State, I only knew one person moving to Denver other than myself. And because everyone was going to Chicago, Minneapolis, back to where they grew up. But there was this undercurrent of energy in Denver. I mean, Fast Tracks had just been approved, and it's like a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project with light rail, commuter rail, everything we see today. But that was just a concept that had been voted on and approved. There was, funny to say, but the Real World, MTV Real World, like happened in Lodo. Like, and that brought, I'm a college kid, so that was like a thing. All of a sudden, Lodo's a place.
Yeah.
And, obviously, Coors Field sparked the redevelopment of Lodo, but then things like, I think that program actually put it on the map for a lot of people. And it was just cool, because when I moved here, you could feel and sense this like energy around, like, oh, people are coming and they're building, the city's growing up. They used to call it Minver or like a cow town.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really the case these days in terms of like, it's become a real city. So it's been fun to watch.
And so you were doing that on kind of outside work stuff, but work, you were finding capital for development and projects that you cared about and that you appreciated, or is it kind of 9 to 5? Like,
yeah, it was, so I got my Series 22, which is, it's like a securities license for direct participation programs, which is real like syndications. So whether it's like an oil and gas lease or a real estate deal, development project, you have to syndicate, you have to raise capital. So you have your general partners who we represented. We raise money for these different general partners. And then you have your limited partners who are the investors. Right? And so I was really just hitting the phones, making a lot of calls, raising capital. But then, the whole world kind of fell apart.
Yeah.
And we went from raising like equity capital overnight to having to raise bridge loan, like debt capital, right? Just to keep these contracts alive on certain projects. Specifically, it was a land and water development company, Renaissance Land and Water. So they were buying agricultural senior decreed water rights off the South Platte River between Evans, south of Greeley, out to Sterling. And they'd engineered a system to pull that water, collect the water, and provide to cities in time of drought. And so it was a very visionary project. And, I wasn't many options when the economic collapse hit, and we shared a space with this particular general partner. So like I was in the room with these guys every day. And so I just kind of went into survival mode, and I was like, well, how can I help? And I ultimately spent a few years with them, became a small partner in that effort when I was like 27, I think, 28. But then the Niobrara Shell, the whole fracking thing happened, and all of a sudden they needed water for fracking, and all of a sudden it just didn't feel right.
Yeah.
And not to mention it was more rural versus urban, and I've always been like an urbanist. So I transitioned out of that. Thankfully, one of my mentors was Amy Harmon of Urban Market Partners. I would say she's hands down one of the most creative, visionary developers in Denver. her father-in-law, Steve Owen, like redeveloped the ice house lofts
Oh, yeah.
and streetcar stables, I believe. But she really integrated our community development with real estate development. I had an opportunity in that moment in time to go work for her, but it wasn't like I can just like jump into her real estate development projects. There's not always room for someone like me at that time where, like her commitment was, I'll let you participate in these conversations and meetings, but you have to get your real estate license.
Yeah.
So you can earn a living. So that's how that kind of started. Yeah. So anyways, it was really inspiring because she was doing really innovative stuff in terms of community development. So as an example, she formed a metropolitan district that really had never been designed in this way previously, where, there's certain things in a city that you have to get consensus on, and you have to get stakeholder buy-in in order to make change or make something happen. So at that point in time, the biggest eyesore in the city was the triangle right across from the Denver Rescue Mission. Broadway intersects with Park Ave. Is that Arapahoe, I think? So that was a really problematic issue. One, it's so exposed to all these passerbyers in their cars, and there was drug use, gang crime, and it's homeless. It just was overtaken. And this is probably before you arrived here, so maybe you don't recall this.
Yeah, no.
But
I know that spot.
It just opened and exposed. And so through this metro district, she was able to really get that community buy-in and stakeholder buy-in and commitment to making a change there. So what you see today, Denver Urban Gardens manages that as a community garden.
Yeah.
But it's fenced in, and so that was just another example of like early years in Denver where you realize the power that we do have to actually, make change. And it's not easy. It's like you have to do this to make our city better.
So you got that more hands-on or close experience of that kind of development, and you're getting your license, and then what?
I worked for Amy for a few years as a real estate broker. That kind of took off for me because I was pretty well connected downtown Denver, and I was able to, help a lot of people like connect with their first homes and buy their first homes. So that was the first time where I saw something kind of flourish, right? Where I was like, oh, well, this works. And Amy allowed me to do commercial as well. Back then I was doing commercial and residential brokerage. I took a liking to residential because it's more intimate, more personable. You're on tour with like a friend, but you're helping them find their home versus, a team of suits walking in from a company looking for like a big commercial office space.
Yeah.
It just
wasn't Huga. It wasn't.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of value I learned in connecting people to space that way and helping friends find the right space. And so what happened was I realized that I was interested in design, and I was tracking design, not just in Denver, but around the world, and concepts really into like lifestyle brands, whether it's like a boutique hotel or that cafe or like whatever it was. Like when I travel, I seek these concepts, right? These experiences. And I was like, well, how could this relate or translate rather to a real estate brokerage? And I hadn't seen anything like that really here in Denver. I never worked for a big company like a Sotheby's or Remax. I never did that. I kind of had to find my own way. And what happened was, I think I stumbled across this company in Sweden who was, positioning their perspective on real estate, marketing, and sales was quite unique. So this company I found and was really inspired by, it's called Fantastic Frame. It's what we've now launched as of October 20th. We've launched here in the United States. But go back 7 years ago, I was truly inspired by their position on this business, on this industry. It's more than, brokers like to talk about volume and they promote their volume, which doesn't always make sense to me because it's like reminding everyone that, you work with maybe 100 or 1,000 clients versus 10 great clients or what,
Yeah.
And so anyways, I just, looking at what they were doing, it was more about aesthetics, design, architecture, and truly focusing on highlighting these elements, these things in a home, right? And there's a lot of press at the time, so I could see and I could read like what their position was and what made them stand out. And so when I conceived this concept for what was Slate Real Estate Advisors, I created like a vision board, if you will, it was like a Word doc, but I took it to the guys at Consume and Create, our graphic designers. And I was like, this kind of inspires like what I want to create. And there's I looked back at this recently and there's screenshots from Fantastic Frank's website. So at inception or prior to inception, they're a big source of inspiration. It's not too often that you find a real estate agency that takes so much care, has a lot of thoughtfulness and intentionality around aesthetics. And it all obviously translates to photography.
Right. Yeah.
And how they shoot a property, where they even engage stylists, which is very unique, I think, to have professional stylists and interior designers, there present, helping to create the imagery you need to like properly present this.
Mm-hmm. Well, what was that experience like? I've obviously talked to so many architects and talked about starting architecture firms a lot, but starting a real estate company, I mean, I'm sure it had, it's a lot of similarities, but what was that experience like for you? Was it a lot of ramen and a lot of hard times, or just like champagne started flowing right away?
No. What's funny is I had to pass my employing broker's licensing exam.
Huh.
That was the first step. You want to start your own brokerage, you have to be an employing broker. So I, in that moment in time, I had procrastinated, and I was going on this big snowboard trip to Japan and with some friends. And I found myself, this is not ideal, but I found myself having to like study for the test on the way there. And then once we're there, it snowed like 6 feet in 4 days. We're in the North Island of Hokkaido, and it's a dream to be in Japan. Here I am, I'm having to sacrifice a day out on the hill or in the slopes to take this test as an online test.
You couldn't push it off a week?
So you mentioned ramen. So
yeah.
I passed the exam.
Different kind of ramen. Yeah.
The real deal.
Yeah.
No, but it was, there's this moment where the guys were out snowboarding and I was at home taking this online test, and I passed, and I realized in that moment, like, well, now I can start my company. I'd already had like vision for what I wanted to do. And to celebrate, I went and got the biggest bowl of ramen I could find. And it was a really amazing day because it was worth it, right? It's
yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah. There you go.
I should have done this before I flew out of the country, but here we are. And it wasn't easy. I mean, what I'm talking about is at this point is just an idea. I knew that in order for me to realize this idea and this vision, I had to find a partner. And that's kind of a long story, but I ultimately feel so blessed that I actually got connected to Stan Kinnis, and I think you met Stan last night, right? Yeah. So Stan, who's a very successful broker, he's been doing it. I think he's been a broker for like 25 years. He's more of a condo project sales guy. He works with developers and sells communities, and he's done that most of his career, including the Four Seasons, the 100 condos above the Four Seasons. So here's a man who's he's really achieved it all, and he worked for a bigger company. So he'd been at Sotheby's and then Kentwood, and he and I connected and around this vision around Slate Real Estate Advisors, like what it means to, one, be a small boutique, be excited about being small and not big. I think we're in a world where even architecture firms and definitely real estate brokerages, it's all about big, 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 big. Mm-hmm. And I don't see any joy in that at all. Really understand it at all. But he also had this, he had more of an understanding of consumer behavior theory than I did. He put words and language to these concepts that I absorb and I live, but I never had a language set around it.
Yeah.
And he did. And so we ultimately really had a shared vision. And so for me, I think the hardest part early on was finding a partner. I don't think it's fun or wise to try to do it on your own.
Yeah.
Like, you're a great example of this. You have a partner in Connecticut, right? And
I did it on my own one time, and I stopped and did it again. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we need partners. It could be as small as like a graphic design project, a branding project. It could be a development project. It could be an architecture firm, a real estate firm, whatever it is. It's nice to be able to have a sounding board, like a partner, not only to like share in the risks, right? And do something together. But I know that without Stan, Fantastic Frank wouldn't be here. Slate would never have been around or started the way it did. So it's just nice when you have someone to like check yourself, like they'll check you and you can check them.
Right. And fill in your gaps, right? And push each other. I think, what did he say last night? That you are the energy or the vision of the company, and, you know, pushing it forward. And he's first in and first out or something. Writes the checks or something.
He's
I don't know.
kind of,
He,
I call him like the OG, right?
The
He's the OG salesman that, first of all, anyone that meets him will tell you like what a joy he is to work with or connect with. And he's got these attributes of like a real mentor and leader. And I realized that at the same time when I had started Slate Real Estate Advisors, I actually also was pursuing my first real estate development project. And that's another example where I definitely could not have done that on my own, right? So back then, this is 2015, I was 3 or 4 years into being a real estate broker, working at Urban Market Partners. I had an idea for Slate Real Estate Advisors. And, you know, one day my mother called me and she was really excited about this old building. So she's back in Des Moines, Iowa, and she's like, you have to. I was actually traveling. I was in Alaska at the moment, and I was like, okay.
Were you just back on the way back from Japan? Just
No.
take a kayak? And
this was a mission. We literally drove from Seattle to Fairbanks, Alaska, a 5-day trip. Long story, but here I
had
am.
a test to take?
And my cousin, and my cousin lives there. So I'm in Fairbanks, and my mother calls. She's like, you have to check out this building. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? She's like, well, it's an old train depot. Like, it's an old Chicago Rock Island Railroad train depot. Well, she had so much enthusiasm. I wrote down the address, and I think I got back to Denver actually, and I looked it up. Turns out it was an old rail car barn. So it's like a repair shop for rail cars. It wasn't a depot. The depot was like down the line a ways. But it's a massive, massive building. And I looked it up and I found the listing and I contacted the brokers and they sent me a PDF. And I remember looking at this PDF. I'm like, wow, it's 26,000 square foot empty brick shell. That's bigger than the source.
Yeah.
And it looks a lot like the source. But I was like, if this were in Denver at that moment in time in 2015, it would have been like a feeding frenzy.
Right. Yeah.
So many developers would have been all over it. But this is in Des Moines, not even downtown. It's like in this old railroad district called Valley Junction. Anyhow, I looked at it and I was like, oh, well, wouldn't that be nice? But that's not my bag, I guess. So I closed it and forgot about it. Like, I'm not going to, do anything.
Yeah.
I was just getting into, realizing, making money. So I was like, no way can I do anything with this. And so I forgot about it. But then 30 days later, my mother unexpectedly passed away. I had to go home and kind of manage that whole process. And, I think it's like the day after her burial, it was like July 8th, 2015. I was like, well, I'm definitely not going back to Denver for a couple of weeks. I'm going to stay here in Des Moines. And I'm the type where I have to like I have to put my mind on something.
Right. Yeah.
It was obviously one of the hardest points of my life. And so I pulled up that email and I was like, contacted the brokers. And at the time, my email was coming from, Urban Market Partners. So I looked like a developer. You go to the website and it's like,
she hadn't cut you off yet. Yeah.
A developer.
Yeah.
And so I said, I happen to be in town. I would like to come tour the building. And I contacted a friend of mine who was a broker, a local broker I went to college with. And he and I went down there. And when we showed up, he was actually a residential broker. And I said, here's a story. Like, I'm touring this building. I'm just interested in it. You're my commercial real estate broker. And I'm a real estate developer. So let's go tour this building. And we get there and the owner of the building was there. And we walk in and the owner knew my friend Colin's father who just passed as well. And so like, there's this crazy dynamic right as we walked in. And then the owner of the building said, well, what's your story? I'm like, well, I live in Denver and I work for a developer, but I grew up in Des Moines. My mentor is Kirk Von Blanc. He goes, well, I know Kirk. Kirk's been in this building 3 times. And I was like, well, that's interesting. Kirk was literally just at my mother's funeral, And so then I contacted Kirk. I was like, hey, I have to meet with you. I want to run something past you.
And why don't you like this building? Yeah. Why have you been there 3 times?
Yeah. Well, I sat with him in his office. I think he thought maybe I wanted to maybe talk about what I just experienced with my mother and life stuff. But I got right to it. And I was like, I found out that you're down at the old Rock Island railcar barn. And like, what are your thoughts? What are your interests there? Because where I live in Denver, I have many examples of adaptive reuse, whether it's Avanti or Source or even Union Station, how they activated that with retail and food and beverage. Kirk goes, well, I'm not so interested in that building as much as I am in 5th Street, which is like the historic Main Street. That was he had his sights set on that because he'd already done the downtown East Village thing and the Market District thing. He was now looking, it's only like 10 minutes drive, but he's like looking, and it was annexed into West Des Moines. So it's technically the suburb, but it's this like little pocket of like a historic railroad. And so anyways, he was more interested in Valley Junction and 5th Street. Long story short, I pursued a project there. It took me a year and a half. I had to raise $1 million where fell out of contract a couple times. I just kept dripping on it, kept doing it. I mean, I was literally selling homes in Denver, setting aside tax, taking the cash I had and putting it in the project. Over a year and a half, I built up an investment in really just risk capital to realize the project. Wow. And what was an honor for me was I engaged Kirk Blanc as my architect.
Nice.
And so here's a visionary preservationist and architect who had my back on it, and we conceived a concept and a plan. But then 90 days or so after I hired him, he unexpectedly passed away.
Oh, man.
So it was this whole thing where I'm like, wow, like how, and so he had a partner architect of 16 years, Evan Shaw, and Evan was more of the production guy, right? Like on the computer. Kirk was like connecting the dots, business development guy, right? But when he passed, I looked to Evan and I was like, hey, all of Kirk's tricks, all of his contacts, like, what he would do. And we started calling it throughout design development. We called it the Kirk Von Blanc, the KVB moments. What would Kirk do? And so if I were to take you into the project today, which is called the Foundry DSM, the website's thefoundrydsm.com. But you can see what we realized there in this project. And I can walk through the space or look at the photos and say, well, that's a KVB moment. That's a KVB moment. He was a master at wabi sabi, this idea of like, let's leave some of the historic character, there's beauty and fragility and imperfection. He was really a master of that, blending the modern and contemporary elements with the historic, decay, and broken elements of the old brick building and such. So it was really cool to not only honor him, but also my mother through that process in that project. And so the Foundry today is three concepts under one roof. It's a distillery. The founder of Templeton Rye Whiskey built out a massive production facility. They do all types of spirits there. And then that has a 35-foot wall section that looks into the beer hall, which I got to design. So that was my first time really designing. Obviously, worked with Evan, the architect, but I was able to bring a vision that was like, hey, in Denver, really the source really inspired that whole project. And Kyle, who's a friend, and I look up to him in terms of what he and Mickey, his father, have done. he met with me along the way. And so like, you'll see some elements of that maybe, but we designed a modern European beer hall that functions as like a food truck, food court. So there's a third end user, which is a nonprofit commissary kitchen called the Justice League of Food. So the Justice League is made up of all these food truck owners, and they have a mission-based program around job skills training, like giving at-risk or homeless youth ages 18 to 24 the opportunity to learn skills in a kitchen and a bar, like how to serve, how to prepare food. And so that's really been probably one of the coolest things I've ever done, because today it's still operating.
Yeah.
And it's a place we can go and enjoy. So
when did that finish up?
the first tenant space opened October 28th, 2017, the hall at the Foundry. And so that's the beer hall, right? So it was an easier tenant space to get up and running versus like a distillery or a big commissary kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we just hit 5 years.
So you were, again, yes, you were hustling there with that and putting that vision together and starting Slate at the same time. That project finished up and it had such of a big impact. Then what were you able to turn all that energy towards, right? It has to be sort of hard where you could have such a big impact there in Des Moines with a building like this, but you're here in Denver where all those buildings are bought up already or whatever.
Yeah.
And so did that all just focus into Slate, all that energy, or?
It really did. And, Stan and I had launched Slate. We took over that space I mentioned up the street. We wanted to grow slowly and bring on just a small number of brokers. And we did that. And I was able to, I realized like, it's not like I'm going to compete with the Zeppelins or Continuums or East West. I'd love to pursue development, but here it's just different animal.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I want to move back to Des Moines, great. I could do more projects like I did, but I wasn't interested in that. So I put all my energies and Stan and I put all of our energies into growing Slate Real Estate Advisors, and which we called more of like a design, a brokerage for design conscious buyers, sellers, and developers. And then that was 6.5 years ago that we launched. So now, if you want to talk about where we're at now, we're in the headquarters of Fantastic Frank, or Fantastic Frank, Colorado.
Full circle.
Full circle.
Why did I start a company? Why did I develop a company when I could have just become the company that I want to be?
Yeah, and it's actually a really fun story, because I mentioned how they inspired us from inception. Anytime we brought on brokers, creative partners, marketers, photographers, I would talk about Fantastic Frank. We'd do like a deep dive, like what are these guys doing? Like, why is this interesting in terms of like how they photograph homes? It's more than like, traditional real estate photography. It's more about, you got to get your 35, 40 images, flash on, wide angle lens.
Mm-hmm. Here's the space. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not, it doesn't even really help tell a story of a space when you're just kind of so zoomed out.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were really good at zooming in and like capturing these vignettes. I call them like little moments where like, here's how the light comes in and like hits the dining room table in the morning, or here's how like throughout the day, this space might shift with the daylight coming and going. And so it's more fun, right? It's like a creative process. How do you capture that? And actually the goal was to create imagery that sparks an emotion, right?
Yeah.
Which drives interest in a property, gets someone in the door to tour it and maybe fall in love with it. So that was something I was always interested in. And then Fantastic Frank did that was their thing. And, they took photographers from the editorial, commercial, fashion world and turned their eye to architecture design and interiors. So it did create a very kind of collection, whereas we need 35, 40 photos for the MLS, they're selling homes with like 10 or 12 images or less. Anyhow, so that's over the course of like the last 6.5 years. Well, my wife and I got married September 2021, and a week later after we had our ceremony in Iowa, we flew to Copenhagen, where we got engaged, and we had a whole week in Denmark or in Copenhagen. And we left open 3 days to go somewhere else. And, you look at the map in the time, in the moment, we're like, well, Oslo's here, Helsinki, Stockholm. And we ended up taking a 5-hour train to Stockholm, and we had 3 nights there. The first morning I woke up pretty early that day, and I was like, well, definitely want to stop by Fantastic Frank's office. It's like their first office.
Hey, you know what we should do on our honeymoon?
Well, yeah, exactly. Because what happened was I emailed like their very like general inquiries email. I was like, hey, I'm in town. I've been inspired by you guys for 7 or 8 years. I run a kind of a design-led brokerage in Denver, Colorado, and I want to stop by your office, but I thought as a courtesy, I should just email you and let you know. And of course, one of the founders, whose name is Sven got back to me within an hour, and he's like, well, everyone's out of the office today, but I'm here. Come on by. And so Sarah and I were like doing something kind of touristy in the moment, I recall. And it's like a beautiful fall day, but also it kind of got like overcast and rainy. So like, it's what you might expect from like a day in Stockholm.
Yeah.
And I go, hey, Sarah, I got a car outside. We have an Uber outside. We have to go meet this guy. And she's like, what?
I've got a special surprise for you.
I'm like, it'll only take, 15 minutes to get there. We'll take an hour. And she's awesome because she was all about it. And we went and met with Sven, and we sat there for an hour or an hour and a half and talked about their plans for expansion, which at that point they're in 10 cities in Europe. Today they're in 12 or 13 in Europe. And he told me that they wanted to come to the United States. Their position on the United States is that we've become one of the most design-hungry countries in the world. And I think we've always looked to Europe, right? Americans have looked to Europe for design, fabrication, engineering, from the cars we drive to the clothes we wear, and now like kitchens and architectural elements in our homes, right? But furniture. So their goal was to come to the United States, but that was like a 2024 thing, or maybe late 2023. Well, then in April of this year, I got an email from Sven. He's like, hey, we're ahead of schedule. We just formed our U.S. corporation, Fantastic Frank Americas. We'd like to, we're talking to a group in New York. We'd like to talk to you. If you're interested in that, let's jump on a call. So Stan and I had a really amazing first call with these guys. By the time we're done, they're like, how soon can you meet us in New York City? So they came from Sweden. We came from Denver, and we met there at the Standard Hotel and had a full day of meetings and went out for dinner. For me, this is like a dream, this is so exciting.
Yeah.
And
like
Stan,
in a Herzog and Dimmeron building. And
yeah, exactly. And Stan was really excited too. It was just fun for us at this point. It's just an exploration. It's not like we're going to go do this. We're going to pursue this path. It's like, no, we do everything with intention, and we take time to figure out next, what we want to do. And so he and I had that first meeting, and then we had 90 days to, we signed a letter of intent. We had 90 days to really explore what this could look like. And a big part of that for us was studying our competition here, just to understand, as a small firm, we obviously don't have the support network in our office that bigger firms have. So how do we match that level of service for our people? And that was the deep dive over the summer. It's like, let's really consider further how we, as a small boutique, can provide a level of service that's comparable to bigger firms. And I'm sure you probably experienced that too, running a small architectural design studio. You're not R&L or...
Well, they're gone anyway, but yeah.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, they got bought up.
Oh, well, there you go. Perkins will.
There you go, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably, when you don't have that powerhouse of resources in-house, how do you... So it was just a big exploration for us, and ultimately we were both really excited to explore this partnership with Fantastic Frank.
Was that a bit of a leaving architecture school feeling for you, of putting aside the Slate name and brand and joining up with a different company? Or
I actually never, everyone asked that question.
Yeah.
Everyone close to me, friends, family, they're like, what do you mean you're parking Slate? That's the first question. What's happening to Slate? That's you guys, that's your baby.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about it. That hesitation. And Stan actually put it best. He says, Fantastic Frank allows us to accelerate our path, like where we want to go, where we've always known we want to go and be. They allow us to accelerate that trajectory to get there. And a lot of that comes down to resources. So we have, every day we're connecting with HQ in Sweden, and I actually changed my phone to military time just so I could, stay on track. Because anytime we talk about a meeting, it's in their time for Swedish military time. So Stan and I have come to learn that, in the past, we could be very creative, and we have talented design partners, graphic design partners, and photographers, et cetera, who help us realize the tools and things we need to do our job. And Fantastic Frank now has this whole suite of assets and tools that we can tap into. Now, the American market is very much different than the European market. So we're adapting some of these tools and templates and such. But anyhow, it just kind of, they've got our back, and now we can do what we do best here. And I think they really want to go big across the United States. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Yeah. Where'd that name come from?
If you were to ask anyone at Fantastic Frank, their response will be, you are fantastic. We are Frank. There is no Frank.
That's funny.
There's never, I thought for sure, like, I don't know why I thought this early on, but I thought maybe one of the founders had a
dog.
I thought it was like one of the guys' kid.
Yeah.
And I said that to Tomas Martiz. I was like, so is your kid Frank, or who's? They're like, well, that's no, we don't have a Frank. We don't know a Frank. It's actually, here's the quick and dirty on it. It's really a fascinating story. But in 2008, 2009, Scandinavian design was even becoming more of a global sensation, right? People were really talking about this around the same time like Huga becomes a concept. And but Scandinavian design was all the rage, if you will. And they decided that there's an opportunity to disrupt this industry, which, traditional American brokerage, we talked about earlier, like how they photograph homes and all this. Well, in Europe, it's even more lackadaisical. People are with their iPhones shooting photos, and the barrier to entry to, maybe not in Sweden, but in most countries in Europe, to get your license, anyone can do it. And so what they wanted to do was bring a level of care around like design and like actually producing imagery that might be more suited for editorial. And so they started in 2009 a design blog, and they engaged bloggers, and they got up to 100,000 users, followers, if you will. And then they decided to launch the business. So they wanted to build a fan base, I guess, and then launch the business.
That's interesting. It's interesting. I think like one of the first ways I came about you was the design directory you put together, which was, I think I started this podcast first, but then discovered that, and I'm like, oh, well, yeah, here's the list of everybody to interview right here. You had this directory and list of all the best architects in town, and that sets you really apart for me of just like, okay, here's somebody who cares about this community and is trying to document it and bring other people to it. What does community in Denver mean to you, or who is your community?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I feel blessed because I know I'm involved in a lot of different communities. My mind goes directly to like my friend groups in those communities, but where I've kind of found like where I like to, hang out and play is in the more of the creative community. So like last night, the Nook event was a great example. It's like that is only, that space exists as a platform to really build our community and engage with the art and creative community in Denver. I mentioned a lot of the stuff I did in the past with whether it's Union Station or, what I did with Urban Market Partners. That was all about creating community. And I love Denver because, again, coming from Des Moines, having lived in Chicago, like I knew Chicago was too big for me. I was like, well, it might take me forever to build a community, my community in Chicago. There's more barriers to entry, etc. Denver is like the happy medium where it's easier to build a community or find a community and get engaged. And I think we've seen Denver become the city that it is because, there's a lot of proud local communities here that are like championing, like in our case, like design excellence in the built environment. I don't know. I feel like, like even today, we just got asked to host a conversation for what they're calling the Central Street Promenade project. It's like there's like a design, or there's a bond set aside to beautify.
Oh, nice.
Central Street.
Right here on Central. Yeah.
Which is needed.
Yeah.
Because, that stretch between the sidewalk and the fence line there in I-25 is kind of a no man's land.
Yeah. And there's so much opportunity there. I think about that all the time.
Yeah. So, Greg at Dig Studios, he's involved. He's kind of spearheading the conversation. He's now trying to create a community here around conversation, right? So we're actually next Wednesday, we're hosting that first public meeting here at our space. But I think like last night's probably the best example, right? You saw who showed up.
Yeah.
That's our community.
It's a
right
cool
there.
Crew, yeah. And then you go home to a duplex, to a Christian Butler duplex, living next to him, and get that community.
We're not connected. It's two single families.
You're in the same house together with Christian Butler. He hasn't found out yet, and
yeah, he's you did interview him, right?
Yeah,
okay.
in his house, yeah,
nice,
right next to you
in the basement.
No, just in the living room, in that that beautiful courtyard space there.
Yeah, he designed and built our home, so yeah, we feel quite honored to live there, and he's a good friend, so having him next door is awesome.
Yeah,
and I don't know if you saw, but we had lived in High Street, the High Street house he designed and built. Modern in Denver collaborated with a company to create magnets.
Yeah, I saw this? Yeah.
And that house was one of the magnets. So I had to buy those, of course.
Nice. I was pretty proud. I think I had like a majority of those magnet architects on the show, or will be on the show. So yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Let's see. Sweet. The last thing, I mean, you kind of hit on it, but yeah, what are you excited about in the future? Like you've built up so much momentum here, had this big change that you've been talking to me about for a little while, an exciting thing, and now that's here. And what gets you jazzed about what's next?
Definitely seeing the Fantastic Frank brand flourish and grow in the United States. I can think of a few different markets where they'd be so fitting, from Chicago to Austin, Park City, Portland, Seattle. So I think they want to grow in this way. They want to grow in this country. So I'd love to help make some of those connections and maybe start those conversations. I'm really excited about my next development project. It's a personal one. I'm developing a very modern cabin north of Steamboat Springs. I'm most excited about this project because it's one that I'm kind of pursuing personally as a mountain home. So we just closed on 5 acres north of Steamboat in Clark, Colorado. It's about 25 minutes north of Steamboat. And friends of mine who I bought the property from, they're building a cabin, and then a friend and I are building our cabin for our families. And we're working with Brian and Kevin over at Effect Architecture.
Yeah, good guys.
So, it's going to be 1,800 square foot cabin, and it's on this perfect pitch on this totally perfect Colorado like wilderness on the Elk River. Can't see your neighbors. I mean, my friend who's building his cabin will be nearby, but yeah, I'm really excited to kind of realize that. I mean, they kind of conceived the structure and the form. Where I get to play and have fun is on the interiors. So we had our first one-on-one meeting yesterday around like what I want to do in the cabin versus what they're going to do next door. So yeah, so I'm excited to see that project come to fruition, and it's another opportunity for me to create, place, in this case, totally disconnected in the Colorado Rockies.
Yeah. Well, sweet. I just, again, I think from the design directory connecting with you, and then you were very gracious and fun just to connect with, and then supporting the podcast as well. And I appreciate you helping us come alongside and helping us build this community and all the things you're doing to inspire and promote design here. And I'm excited to see where you keep taking it. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You can visit architecting.com, that's architect-ing.com, to see images from this week's guest.
And please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.
Have a great week and keep connecting.
Hi, I'm Eli. This show is made by my mom and dad and these people.
Heidi Mendoza.
Aaron Best. Kyle Bruner.
Emily Childs.
Trevor Motzko.
Zach Huff. Rob Cleary. All right, let's get a coffee. See ya.
Yo, Alexa, play the Plug podcasts. My boy Rudolph enjoys an immersive audio experience. Do you feel me? Ho, ho, ho! With Echo Studio, we can listen to any podcast or song from Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others. Click the link in this episode description.
Santa, check out my podcast.
Damn, even the Grinch has a podcast. Merry Christmas, ho! Ho, ho!